Hi, this is Seamless, and today I'm going to do a little rundown of mixing and mastering in my track Resolve. If you haven't heard it yet, there's a link in the description to the original playthrough video, and I guess I'll get right to it. So now I've been holding off on doing how to mix and how to master videos just because, in comparison to like stuff like the bass techniques that I do, there's not really a definitive way to go about it that I can be like, this is the way you do it and stuff like that. But what I can do is show you how I do things, so that if you happen to find the results in my tracks of things that I've done to be what you want, then that'll be useful for you. But you have to understand that it's not super duper cut and dry, and it's usually pretty case by case anyway, even within my own stylistic leaning and opinions. But it is largely it's not I'm not an authoritative figure on the subject. I'm just trying to put that out there. But whatever, let's do things. So mixing a track is something that you want to do from the very beginning of when you're making a thing. And what I mean by that is that usually when I start making a track, I begin by making the drop, and then there's like a skeleton of a mix that I will do pretty much every time, and then I'll maybe do some deviations afterwards. But I will go over what that is. So what I'll do, I'll put together some drums. What's that sound? I'll put together some drums and just something that sounds all right. I've talked about it before, but I get my drum samples from ImageLine's Groove Machine, which is a plugin that when you install it, installs a library of samples that you use within Groove Machine. You should look it up. It's kind of cool. You can download the demo, and then you'll get the samples. So most of the samples that I'm using are already pretty high quality, like to begin with. So I don't have to do a whole huge amount of work to make them sound at least what I want to use in a track. So in this particular track, I started with the pre-drop, kind of like the first heavy sound that we got was the kind of orchestrated thing. I'm gonna start playing it. It's kind of loud. In 3, 2, 1. So I started with that, and then I moved on to this. I literally made only that section, like this long of a section, before I then began to do mixing things. And what I would do is I put everything that's a bass into a single bus. And I label it the side bus. And that's because I'm going to sidechain all the basses to the kick and the snare. If it's an electro track, it's usually just the kick, because the kick and the snare happen on the same beat. But I sidechain pretty much everything, but the basses are all sidechain the same kind of sidechain. Like some of the other elements, like the orchestra and the ARP and stuff like that, they're all sidechained, but they're not the same intensity, or they're sometimes more intense. So I'll do that. And then in this bus, I'll multi-band compress all of the sounds that are coming through it. So all the basses have a compressor running on it. I'm not using the master compressor in Maximus. The Maximus works by having low, mid, and high band compression that then runs through a master compression to use to glue it together. But I don't use that because I only want the multi-band compression. And what I mean by that, I mean that I'm not using the master limiter. It's not being limited to 0 dB, which if it would, it would look like this. But I am doing just the slightest bit of compressing to make the gain increase. However, it very rarely gets low enough to make that matter. As you can see. So I'll do that, and then I'll make the drum bus. Now what the drum bus does, and you're probably thinking, oh, well, what kind of EQing or whatever did I do on the snare and the kick and stuff like that? But as I said, the samples were already there, so the tweaks that I make are not very huge, except for this gargantuan EQ you're looking at right now on the snare. But the basic principles that I like to employ for doing snare EQing anyway is to accentuate the fundamental, bring down some of the high mids, and then make the and the high frequency stuff kind of very apparent. And again, this is to taste. This is all to taste. That's the kind of stuff that I like to hear. Same thing with the kick. I very accentuated the high frequency because there wasn't a lot to do when not doing it. And I run that all. I run everything that's a drum, except in this particular case, I have a hats verb. There's a reverb channel, a reverb send that I made that I run the hats through. That I sidechain with the kick and the snare to give that kind of like sucking feeling to it. Which is neat. But I run everything else into the bus. And then I do kind of what I did with the sidechain bus, which is to crush everything together. Only this time I do actually do a little bit of the master limiting. And that's because I actually am trying to encourage compression and like driven artifacting. And I'm doing something that's not very transparent in terms of compression, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm leaving the low kind of the way it is, and I have a really big release curve. It's actually not even doing any compression at this stage. It's doing it in the bus. You see, the low isn't really. I mean, I'm gaining it up a little bit, but it's not doing any compression. It's just being louder. It's just being brought up some. So there's not any distortion or really any compression going on, and the attack is off. The attack is off for all of it because if I had different attack values, it would reach some kind of phasing issues that wouldn't be desirable. Now, as you can see here, it looks like the mids are clipping, right? And that's because I have soft saturation engaged. And there's a couple of kinds of soft saturation you can use, but but I basically just leave it so that it's the smallest like area ever, and it's at 0 dB. And what it's called soft saturation because it's basically a form of distortion that because it's doing the compression like ridiculously fast, and so it's distorting the signal. And like if you ever brought the attack down too fast and release and the head down, look at head values down on some other compressors, you might hear it kind of distort a little bit, and that's what happens. So that's what soft saturation does. But I'm only doing it on the mids and a bit on the highs, and also on the master. But there's also a bit of limiting going on the master. In fact, I'll show you what that sounds like without that. If I were to just limit it straight. Now, when I said that I'm encouraging compression artifacts, what I mean is that I kind of like the sound that you get from over compressing drums. But I don't like the soft saturation. Like the snappiness that you're hearing is a result of the soft saturation. But I also like the kind of smooth, like compression, like the sucking effect that you get when like the pumping is what it's called. It's referred to as pumping. I like that, and I like to keep that in for drums especially. Now, when I have this and I have the side bus up, is basically it. I mean, I do a little bit of EQing sometimes. I have a filter in here because I do effects with that earlier on in the track. When I have that, I then go into master and I make a master Maximus, which I do basically what I just described with the drums, only for the whole track. And again, this is something that I set the taste. Play everything together, and this will be also after I sidechain, kick it a snare to the basses. Now, see, you can see here in the master bass band in the Maximus, I am actually doing a whole actual compression on it. Like I'm bringing up levels and compressing the dynamics so that it is very apparent. And that's why I didn't really care so much about it in the drum bus itself. Something else I do in the master Maximus, as well as the one in the side bus, is I remove stereo separation on the bass. And this is so that the bass is always, I don't mean the bass patches, I mean like the bass frequencies. Like if I were to... I keep it so that there's not any kind of phase information or phase cancellation or information loss as a result of phasing problems. That's why I do that. But at the mids and the highs, I do a little bit of additional stereo separation to give you a larger stereo image in the track as a whole. Now, this I refer to it as separation because it's not stereoizing. It's not making a sound that's not stereo. There's already stereo information at play on stuff like the bass patches and the kicks and stuff like that, the snares and drums in general. Like the reverb is pretty stereo-y. So that kind of stuff. Like there's already stereo imaging going on. Yes. So let's talk about sidechaining and the importance of sidechaining. So I've done a tutorial called Sidechaining for Fun and Profit. That's in my channel. You can find it. And I talk about how to sidechain. Well, let's actually show you what the effect of it is. So here's what it sounds like when it's sidechained. So right now we have the two loudest elements competing for space in the mix, the drums and the basses, and pretty much every other sound because it's dubstep and it's loud as hell. But why? I mean, obviously we know why we do this, is so that we can cut the hole that's exactly as long as the or a little bit longer depending on how much pumping you want. But we cut the hole in there so that the louder elements can mesh together pretty well. And drums are very fast sounds, so if it's like you can use sidechaining for like vocal ducking, where like someone will talk and everything else will get quieter, and because it's a very comparatively longer event audio wise, a longer audio event, the effect is way more apparent. And I think it's way quieter, and then the vocals stop, and I think it's way loud again. Well, with drums, the decay, like the decay on the drum hit is so fast that it's not really a noticeable effect, unless you make it noticeable like you would in like a trance song or something like that. I like it just to be a little bit noticeable because I like the heaviness that it lends the track for it to be very kind of sidechainy, kind of like that. But what does that sound like when we don't sidechain it? It sounds stupid as hell. Like that's usually the first thing I look for if someone sends me a track and they're like, "Oh, what is it? What do you think of this? How does it sound?" And if it sounds like that, it's because they're not sidechaining. I mean, there's ways around that. Traditional mixing methods include things like scooping out equalizer parameters in one, like the bass, where the kick would normally sit, so that you don't have to do that. But it's, I mean, this is kind of cheating in that kind of respect, but doing this allows you to push things way harder. And that's why I do that. Now, normally, in the past, I talked about how you can cut the lower frequencies by like 30 hertz or lower and like a pre-EQ before you go to compression. And you don't actually need to do that with Maximus because Maximus already has a low cut parameter. And right now it's at 20 hertz, and that's where I like it. Because I mean, this is a very low set song, so I kind of need those extra lower 2 hertz or whatever. But Maximus takes care of that. But that is a good idea if you don't have that kind of option in your compressor to do a low cut before the compressor, because honestly, below 30 hertz is not huge. Is usually not a huge amount of information that's doing anything other than just giving your mix a hard time, and you need none of that at all. So that's more or less the basic template that I'll begin with a track. I'll create the drum bus with the massive compression, the sidechain bus where I'll usually stick the bass. I mean, everything else that is played when drums are also being played has their own sidechaining engaged, and then also the master. I do all that work first, so that when I make any new sounds and I put it through this chain, it'll already be colored by the chain, so I'll know how to EQ the sound appropriately to sound like the way I want it to sound. Because if I set up the sounds beforehand and then plug it into this, like the compression as its own, like basically an EQ effect, because you're like pushing the highs up, pushing the mids around, doing things to the lows, that kind of thing. So it will really mess with your sound, and then you have to do a whole bunch of work to compensate to get it back to what your original vision of the sound was. So if you start with this, then you don't have to do that later. You just kind of start like that, and then I write all the stuff, and it takes me months to figure out everything to put around a drop, except for this track because I kind of started with the melodic elements. So that's actually kind of a hilarious thing that I just showed you there. Because the drums are all being routed to the drum bus, I can turn off all the drums by hitting the drum bus. But the sidechain information is not actually tied to the audio. It's tied to the audio like event data, which the side input, and that's being sent from the kick and snare channels apart from the drum bus straight into the side bus. So if I turn on the drum bus, I'm disengaging the audio out for the kick and the snare and the rest of the drums, but the audio information is still going to the side bus, and that's why when I was playing it just then without the drums, everything was still being side chained because the kick and the snare were still engaged. And such. General good mixing tips includes things like EQ your sounds to fit together well. But now, this is why I have been hesitating to give advice on this kind of stuff, because I don't want to send people down quote unquote the wrong path for this sort of thing. But I've found that I generally don't need to worry about equalizing so much when I crush everything, when I am doing major multi-band brick walling for everything. It kind of takes care of itself. There's a little bit of there's downsides to that, and you do need to fix them with equalizing. Let's listen to what one of the basses sounds like without EQ. Let's look at this guy, because I like how it sounds. It's not a humongous difference, but it adds up, and especially when compared to everything else that's going on at once. And again, that's the big worry with making sounds, EQing stuff together, is when stuff's all piled on. But general ideas like things that aren't bass sounds don't need to have bass frequencies in them. Things that are bass sounds don't usually need to have a whole lot of high frequency information in them. But again, because it's the dubstep, everything is loud all the time, so that's not a hugely applicable thing. What else? I believe. Yeah, okay. I got all the ideas that I want to get through here. Again, with the recap, because I am losing track of what I'm talking about. Make the drum bus, make the side bus, side chain your basses, master, limit, just freaking brick wall, all the stuff. Use multi-band. Multi-band compression is the greatest thing that's ever happened in the world. The point of multi-band compression, if this is lost on you, because it was on me for a while, is that you're not when you compress something. You can see here in my voice, right? When I'm talking, most of my information is in the mids here, and there's some highs and there's some lows. But if my lows were really, really loud, and I was just doing one band compression, which I actually am on my voice, boink, I'm not doing low, mids, or highs. I'm just doing master compression because it's just quick and dirty. But if we look at this particular one, if my lows were really high, if it were really loud, it would bring down the whole signal to make sure that one peak in the lows was at 0 dB or lower, if that's what I set it to. And that would bring everything else down, which is traditionally how compression works. So then if in multi-band setting here, and I had this band set so that's where the mids cut off, if that mid was really loud, this band would bring down all the information in this band, and it will leave all the information in these other two bands completely untouched, so that it gives you a more transparent and more total compression settings for lots of things. Now, you can actually do this without a multi-band compressor plugin. I'm doing it at Maximus because I'm comfortable with it, and that's fine. But if you wanted to, you could do something say, route everything into because you could do this in FL Studio. You could route everything into a single track, and then take this track, and then route it to a whole bunch of tracks, as many as you wanted, and then on each of these, you can open up a convolver or an EQ even. I like using a convolver. Basically, you really want a linear phase split. The Maximus is designed to have you can do 24 or 12 dB splits, right? And it does have a linear Yeah, linear phase filter engage right there, which I haven't really needed ever. Because again, a lot of the artifacts you get from not having linear phase, you can correct with EQ, but that's not strictly true when you're doing like a 10-band split. And you can go to Convolver, get your linear phase EQ, do a split, and then load up another one, and then just do like individual bands for all these bands. And then on each of these, you can load up your standard, everyday, not special like limiter thing, which also has a compressor built into it. I'm particularly a fan of FL's limiting visual representation of stuff. Or you can just do a normal just freaking compressor kind of thing, or whatever compressor you have that you like, you can do that. And then you have a freaking 10-band split, right? That's cool. And then that benefit applies that we discussed for multi-band's point with that. So you can do that if you felt like it. If you don't feel like shelling out for something like Maximus or Ozone or whatever. But yeah, I tend to just I don't really have very complicated mastering setups for my stuff, because this stuff's, it sounds complicated, but it's really not in comparison to how like the big guys do stuff, or people in general like to do things. Because like normally they'll tell you about how like, oh, we layer so many sounds on things, we just layer everything. I try as hard as I can to make the sound that I want in a single sound, which is a serious disadvantage, and I know that. And a couple times I've tried layering, it's actually just really awesome. I need to do it more, but I don't. And as a, like this is layering. So I've got the bass, and I also have a trombone hit. Like that's layering, and that sounds sweet. But like, the individual bass businesses and stuff like that, they are loud and crazy, but there's not a lot on top of it. So it's not hugely difficult to mix that. It's not. But if you do more complicated stuff, more layers and stuff you have on it, and depending on how much of it you want to be heard, it gets to be a real interesting juggling game of EQing and compression. But this should get you in the right direction, I guess, if you're doing more or less what I'm doing. Like, it's obvious. If you like what I'm doing, if you hate my music, then obviously this is not very effective for you. But if you like how my stuff sounds and you want to sound like this, then this should help you sound like me, if that's your thing. Like, which is, again, why I've kind of held off on doing these sort of things, because it's very specific to what I do. And I guess if that's what you're asking for, then congratulations, now you know. But again, this is not how everything should be done. This is not even like, lots of people have told me that my idea of what mixing and mastering is laughable. And given like what they compare my stuff to, like I'm not disagreeing with them. I just like what I do. I like how it sounds. So I don't really care. Until I need to do what they like, I will be doing what I do. Of course, you've seen, if you follow my videos, I have another video about the kind of mixing setup I do for a metal track. That's wildly different, because I'm going for a more transparent, loudness gained compression setup. And here I like compression artifacts, and I like the kind of loose feeling heaviness that you get from that in EDM stuff. I really do. I really like that. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Sorry I haven't been doing a whole lot on YouTube and stuff like that. I've just been really busy. But there's that sound again. I will do more at some point. In the meantime, have a nice day. If you have any questions, I will try to answer them. And I did that backwards. But bye.